I'm giving you some trade secrets here, Jordan. I usually don't. I think you're going to talk to people and they're going to say, "He told you what?" Like I usually. But you work with some good people, so you got me open up a little bit. You're gonna be like the Barbara Walters of our business here.
What is basketball? What is it? What is it? Is this basketball? Is that basketball? What is it? What is basketball?
Welcome back again to Solving Basketball. I am Jordan Sperber, and in today's episode, I'm joined by Canisius head coach Reggie Witherspoon. From 1999 to 2013, he was the head coach at Buffalo, where he was running the continuity ball screen offense. And there are quite a few coaches that refer to the offense as Buffalo because of those teams. And I think given the offense's prevalence in the game today, you can definitely make the case that he's one of the most influential X's and O's coaches, period. In this podcast, we dive deep into the X's and O's and the origin of the offense, how long he's been running it for, how it's changed over time within their system from Buffalo to Canisius. And we also touch on some of the other teams running it. It feels like almost every team in the country is running some degree of continuity. But there are specific teams who have been running it as their primary offense, and teams that have been really successful at the top of the sport in the last couple of years. Reggie was on Anthony Grant's staff at Alabama during the 2014-15 season. Now, obviously, Grant is the coach at Dayton, where they just had one of the best offensive seasons in recent memory. They led the country in effective field goal and 2-point percentage, running the continuity ball screen with the flare screen and the UCLA screen, just like Canisius does and has for the past several years now. So we talk about them, and at the end, we hit on high school and AAU teams now running the offense pretty regularly, and just why he thinks that this offense that he's been running really for 2 decades now has emerged as the most popular in college basketball. We recorded the conversation on Zoom, so if you go on YouTube, there is a video component. It's not necessary to watch it over there, but in addition to having the video of us speaking, I did spend probably a good 10 hours or so on editing, adding in clips of Canisius, of Buffalo, from Reggie's time there. And then also some other teams, Dayton, BYU, Stanford, Virginia. There's clips that are all animated and annotated, just like a typical Hoop Vision YouTube video. If you're looking for a little bit more context behind what we're talking about. But again, we didn't have that video during our conversation. If you are listening to the audio version, I'll probably tweet out a few short clips from the video if you're interested in that, as well as a newsletter that's going out later today that recaps the episode, has some more video. If you're not signed up already, the website to sign up for that Hoop Vision newsletter is hoopvision.substack.com. Thank you very much for listening and enjoy the episode. I am now joined by Canisius head coach Reggie Witherspoon. Reggie, thanks so much for taking the time to come on. I really appreciate it.
My pleasure, Jordan.
I have wanted to have you on for a long time. You've been at the top of my coaching list, and I'm not just saying that. But it specifically to talk about your offense, which I think a lot of my audience is already aware of. And I'm excited to get to that. But the first question for everyone on my podcast, regardless of if they're a coach, a media member, a player, whatever it is if we walked into a gym right now and I went underneath the basket and you shot 100 free throws, how many would you make out of 100?
Eyes closed or eyes open?
First person to add a constraint there. Eyes open.
I would be I'd be upset if I made less than 90. So I would say somewhere between 90 and maybe 94.
Okay. So that's
get below the 88, somewhere in there.
That's a very solid number, and what that usually leads to is some information on your playing background. That question, I tried to do a little bit of research to see if I could find a free throw percentage for you, but the best I could find was that you played for John Beeline at Erie Community College. Is that right?
Yeah, that's true. So I did play there, and for people who are familiar with him, shooting is a good thing to have if you're going to get any playing time. And he was that way back then. Now we were all a lot younger then. He was in his 20s, and he was a good shooter, and we all knew it. And he had an assistant coach, Ron Peroni, who was a great shooter, and we all knew that too. And then after that, he went to Wheeling, what's now called Wheeling Jesuit. It was called Wheeling College then. Coach played there, and that's how I ended up there. I went there, and my first year played for Tim Clouser, and then my last year there I played for Jim O'Brien. There's two different. Everybody says which one. The one I played for left there to become an assistant coach with the Knicks when Rick Pitino was the head coach, and then left there to take the head job at Dayton. And then after that was rejoined Pitino at Kentucky, and then went with them to the Celtics, and then became the head coach of the Celtics and the Sixers and the Pacers. So I had three different coaches. The only coach I've ever played for more than one season for, from 7th grade on up, was John Beeline.
Were you running the two guard stuff, like the Princeton two guard stuff?
No, you know what? He hadn't started running that yet as a coach, so we really didn't. We ran a lot of flex then, and we ran some ball screen stuff too. And you just had to be able to, dribble it and pass it and shoot it. And the thing that I think people sleep on a little bit with him is you also had to be able to defend. And I think he's remained that way.
My first question on your offense, when I made my initial video a while back, and I think that you have seen it. It might have been a while back, but the first thing I did was I surveyed a bunch of coaches on what they call it, right? Because I was at New Mexico State and Nevada, and we called it certain things. I didn't necessarily want to use our play calls, but I also wanted to see what different programs call it. And Buffalo was a big one that a lot of people call it Buffalo. Obviously after your teams. Gonzaga was another one. And then different forms of continuity ball screen, Euro ball screen motion, things like that. So I kind of want to put an end to this once and for all. What do you call it?
Well, when we first started running it, we didn't really call it anything. We called everything else something. If we were in a play, we call that, and we didn't really call it. If we were talking about it as a staff, we might say the stuff, or it was usually, when we run the stuff, we need to look for this. And then, now we'll call it different things, flow, but we have different variations of it. So we'll call it according to the different variations of it. When we first started running it, well, I can't say when we first started running it, but when we really got it going, we had players that were really good, and they were alert. So we let them make the adjustments on their own. And we had a lot of different things they could do, and they were able to kind of handle a lot of that stuff on their own.
You sort of started talking about when you first started running it. Let's talk origins in terms of how long ago and where it came from.
Yeah, this has been I did an interview a while back, and I'm guessing that the person who did the interview, I won't say who he is or where he worked, but he was kind of trying to get at, who did what first. And I said this to him, and I'll say it now, like I can't say who was doing what on the other side of the world. I can only say we didn't see anybody else doing it, and it took a while to kind of develop it to where it is now. So we were doing, I was a junior college coach, as you know, and we were doing some things continuity wise and a lot of dribble handoffs. Um, and we brought that to Buffalo, and then we kind of tweaked it, and we had a really difficult time at Buffalo just getting good shots. It was a really difficult situation to be in. Uh, so this is a story that probably you may not be familiar with. Um, I was at Erie Community College where I played for John B. Lyon, so I coached there. And 5 games into the season, the University of Buffalo called me to come. And typically you don't have coaching changes during the middle of a college basketball season, but even less likely are you to have somebody come in that's not on the staff and be the interim coach. So I started there December 4th, 1999. And we had a game on December 7th. And I think I knew maybe about 3 or 4 of the guys' names that were on the team. And our game on December 7th was against North Carolina. So you can imagine that was a tough situation. And I'll kind of cut through some of those things so that I could tell you stories about that. We would go on forever. But after that year, I got appointed as the head coach. And the good news was that, I was a Division I head coach. The bad news, we had self-imposed sanctions that were pretty restrictive. Like we couldn't start practice till November the 1st. That was one of them, and scholarship reduction, a lot of things in a very, very tough conference, mid-major conference. And so that made it even more difficult to get shots. So we kind of tweaked what we did at Erie Community College. And we were really having problems that year and even the next year at using ball screens. And teams would hedge us so hard that in one case, we actually dribbled over and back. I mean, we had a ball screen on the side of the court, about free throw line extended, maybe a little higher out. And we actually dribbled it so much that we went over and back. And that's when we started really kind of tweaking things enough that we sort of started developing things into what we have now. So again, junior college was 97 to 99, and then tweaking it from like 99 to now.
One thing that's happened over time that I wanted to specifically talk about, I went back to a game from 2011 and wanted to see what it looked like, being familiar with your teams now. And I didn't know if those Buffalo teams would be, to give the listeners who might not know as much about the audience a little bit of background here. I'll back up for a second. So in the offense, there's 2 players on one side and 3 players on the other side. And that ball screen is being set with no one in the corner on the 2 side. The way most teams run it is with the players on the 3 side. One of them is going to cut back door when the ball gets reversed. And so now the 2 side is on the other side. And in 2011, that's what you guys were doing. And maybe I'll tweet out some clips of it so that the listeners have a better idea. But now, and I have them on my list to talk about Dayton as well this year. Instead of cutting back door with the 3 side, you're setting a flare screen and a UCLA screen, or some comment, basically playing with the 3 side instead of. So when did that evolve? The only thing I know is that in 2011, the back door was still happening.
All right, so we'll back up. So I'd say 2002, 2003, and 2000, definitely 2003, 2004. And I wish it was synergy backed up to that so you could kind of see. Those were the time we had some options on that side, and we refer to that as a tandem side. And we had some guys that were really good, and 2 of them have coached with me that were playing then. And one's on our staff now, and Calvin Cage and Turner Battles at ETSU. and those guys are really good at picking up options. So that side of three you refer to as two guards.
Yep.
And we refer to those two guards as the tandem side. And we gave them probably 4 or 5 options of things that they could do. And one of them was to cut through and end up on the other side. But we also had them cut back through and come back out on the same side. And they ran it very well. They ran it pretty quickly, and we got good shots. We were doing that a lot, and against really, really good coaches in our conference. And as they got better at defending what we did, we added some options. So you referred to 2011. In 2011-12 season, we started then the action that you talked about, which was, setting that flare screen. And then the next year we added, the UCLA screen you referred to. Mm-hmm. And it became really difficult to guard as we got better at it. Now, of course, I think coaches will understand, like, sometimes when you come in and you put something into a whole team, you don't have veterans that can help newcomers because it's new to everybody. So it's you may not be as efficient at it at that point. So we were adding things. I say that because we were adding things along to a group that knew what we were doing aside from the newcomers. So we were able to sort of say, okay, let's add this to it. Let's add that to it. And they were able to pick up on it a little bit. I still don't think necessarily as good as the guys that were with us from, say, 02-03 to 2006. Those guards and bigs were really good at, like, picking things up and being able to take in a lot, because you don't want them thinking too much. If you overload the mind, the feet get a little slower. So they were able to kind of not get overloaded mentally with options and still have quick enough feet. And so they could take in a lot of options. But the thing that I've learned is that your former players, they're like, Coach, how come we weren't doing this then? You mentioned the flare screen. Man, if we could have done that then, I would have got a lot of open threes. And a guy like Zach Filzen, who's coaching now, Division III, he got a lot of threes off of that flare screen. But we've added different options to that. I think the thing that most people do is send that cutter straight through to the other side. And it's you can get that implemented. You can get that installed a little quicker.
For some teams that don't really run it as their primary offense necessarily, but just as a change of pace, I think it's probably the easier thing to do. With the flare UCLA option, or just with stuff happening over there, one thing I noticed watching your film was how much you got on the two side. The guard who was going to be coming off the empty ball screen would reject and cut back door. And because the weak side is so worried about the flare and whatever is going to occur there, it's just wide open space wise. Mm-hmm. But on the flip side of things, I've even talked to a MAC head coach about this, because no one is switching sides. And for the most part, those three are working kind of like in tandem, I guess, and then in partner, it kind of disrupts what some coaches might want in terms of, like, everyone's changes sides of the floor, changing that low man. So is there like a trade-off there?
Well, again, so that speaks to kind of your options and how much of this offense you have in. Well, let me say this. If you're running it as a play, then you can obviously do what you do with other plays, and that's just scout the play.
Sure.
Right. If you're running it as an offense and you've got enough of it installed so that you have different options, then that can be a little bit more difficult to just sit there and load up on what these three guys will stay on this side of the court. So, I think the main thing when you run it enough is to see how you're being guarded and what's available from it. People talk about the ball screen part of it, but I think it's what, you got two guys in a pick and roll. What are the other three guys doing? And when I say three guys, I really mean three defenders. What are the other three defenders doing? Because if they don't have to be occupied in the college game, then you can load up on that pick and roll, and they just help and recover. And everybody works on that all the time. But if there's other actions that they have to defend while there's the pick and roll, now there's a little bit of a dilemma. Do I help here? If I do help here, who's going to help me there? Or am I being put in a position where I have to help and be in two places at one time? And that's really, I think, what everybody wants, right? If you got good spacing and you can put your opponent's defense into a dilemma, then you hope to get good shots.
So you mentioned how everyone thinks first and foremost about the ball screen, but the other three players are as important. That's another thing that's you definitely see when watching your team. I think in that first video that I made, I commented on how there's not a lot of dribbling, which is not what you would think for a ball screen offense necessarily. But especially whenever someone's coming off an empty, it's sometimes it's just reversing to get to the next action more so than even trying to get to the nail. Virginia started running this a year or when they won the national championship 2 years ago. And for them, they were at least going to the nail every time with the dribble, looking for the roll, maybe looking to get downhill and then giving it up and throwing to the other side. You guys sometimes don't even really look to get there. And it becomes more of a motion type offense than just ball screens. How's that decision been played out over time?
So we do want some motion element to it. And that's what I mean about the options of it. But the other side of that is that I think in some cases you will find bigs that might not be as aggressive in their pick and roll coverage.
Mm-hmm.
So if they're not really getting out there and hedging or trying to stop the ball, you can get to the nail, and we would want to do that. If we're playing against a team where they're just going to let us, drive the ball to the nail, drive the ball to the paint, then we're going to do that and try to see if we can get an easy shot or get them to be in a rotation. But what we don't want to be doing is being a pick and roll and dribble, 400 times in the same spot. That's what we want the ball to move. And depending on how we're being guarded, that might mean less dribbles. So we don't want it to get stuck on one side, but we do want to make our opponents, have to reveal how they're going to play pick and roll defense.
I'm definitely getting that it has a lot to do with the opponent, like any read-oriented offense, how they play you. You've already mentioned this a couple of times, but in that 2011 game I watched, that the team you were playing, I don't remember who it was, but they were hard hedging. And I would imagine that you see that less, at least to that extent, the blitz or whatever it is. But how has that changed over time? With now so many teams run it, teams are more used to seeing it. Teams run more ball screens in general, not even necessarily the continuity. But how has ball screen defense changed from 1997 to now?
So that 2011 team, it was a team that we had a young man, Zach Filzen, who was top 5 in the country and made 3-point field goals. And he was the next year too. And if you didn't hard hedge him, he was really a threat to make threes, and he could make a lot of them. And so there's the dilemma that we talked about. Like if you don't get out there, he's going to make some threes. So now here's the other side of that. So he was top 5 in the country and made threes 2011 and 2012. In 2012, the starting bigs who were setting those screens were both first team all conference, and one of them was player of the year. So it kind of, those two things went hand in hand. And that if, they both, I think, helped each other to get open shots. And so to answer your question, I think teams are defending pick and rolls according to the danger of the person with the basketball. So if they, now that line got moved out, so people don't think that they have to go out there and defend that 3-point shot, then they might have their big to sit back, or they might even go under it. I think no matter what, it helps if you have ball movement and you have some motion attached to what you're doing, so that at least no matter what they're doing, they're going to have to guard some movement. And then you can kind of see, okay, let's see how they actually are defending this.
There was another game last year, I think it was at St. Peter's, where they were, when guarding the big in the slot, the big without on the weak side slot, they were like in the restricted area almost, daring the three. And especially last year's team, just looking at the stats and not knowing the players all that well, your 4s and 5s were non-shooters. I'm guessing that was probably a game plan that you saw more than just the St. Peter's game. But from a scouting perspective, do you make tweaks to the offense from game to game going into it based on how you think that you're going to be played, how they've played you in the past, especially in conference play?
That and what the strengths and weaknesses are of our guys. Now actually last year we one of our bigs was a pretty good shooter, but he wasn't always available. And a couple were good shooters that didn't have the confidence to shoot it. It helps obviously if you got 5 guys out there that can dribble, pass, and shoot, as I went back and said about Coach Beeline, right? So if you have 5 guys out there that are a threat to do that, then it obviously helps your spacing. But we will. There are certain guys that if they're just not a threat to shoot, then they will not be in that spot. Then we'll change some things and put them in a different spot on the floor, and we'll run it differently. If we have a mismatch, so let's say, for instance, if we do have one of those guys who's a pretty good shooter, but they put a guy on him who can't really defend around the basket, then we would do the same thing as if that guy couldn't shoot. We put him around the basket. And we have some different action. So out of that same look, we would have some different options and some different actions that we would run to keep him maybe closer to the basket and to give him some looks around the basket.
When you said the 5 guys that can dribble, pass, and shoot, that was Dayton last year, running a very similar offense. So for the listeners that don't know, you worked with Anthony Grant at Alabama on the same staff together. I'm curious, did you, I know that for in season for coaches, it's really busy to watch anything that's not your opponents but did you have much of an opportunity to watch Dayton last year?
I did. I watched Dayton every chance I got. First of all, I love Anthony Grant, and I loved working with him. I learned so much from him. And I love the way they played. Rodney Chapman was at Chattanooga, and we were recruiting him when I was at Chattanooga. So I was familiar with him. And then Anthony Solomon was a head coach at St. Bonaventure when I was at Buffalo, and our families gotten to be friends. So I was familiar with that. And then I have a nephew that works at Dayton too. So yeah, I watched Dayton. You're right. You don't get a chance to watch as much as you want. When you have somebody that you have friends and they're on TV, and maybe you have time, and you maybe you're doing some work on your laptop and TV's on, and you say, which game am I going to turn on? Well, if Dayton was on, I always chose Dayton. Yeah. And they were awesome. They were terrific to watch.
What stands out for within their continuity offense? What was so good? I have something, but I'd be interested to hear what you think.
um, they did so much so well. They passed it very well.
Mhm.
They were extremely unselfish. There's so many things that they did well. They didn't the ball didn't stick in spite of the talent of the people that they have. It didn't stick, and they also they went from defense to offense like it was the same thing, and they really defended you well and made you struggle to get shots. But once they got on offense, they didn't let you set up and didn't let you get organized. So it didn't matter what they were running they were really good at going from defense to offense.
The ball not sticking, even though they had the talent where even if it did stick, they probably would still get good shots. I think that's a testament to them for sure. I noticed this a lot when watching your teams as well, and Dayton, so we can bring this back to you guys. But one thing they were really good at is when they set a screen and they roll to the basket, they're looking for a seal or a high-low. They got tons of baskets off high-lows, but they don't overpost. And as soon as the ball gets reversed, they always have great timing, which is that's the part that I noticed with you guys last year. When that action is occurring on the next side, the lift from the big is like perfect to take away the help. How do you teach that, especially with a really good big who can post, to get him out to set up the next action?
Yeah, that's because that's kind of counter to what they would normally do. I think if they were just playing in the gym and pick up, is there's going to be probably more standing.
Yep.
And so to get them out of that is a challenge. I think when a team trusts each other, you can kind of see that, okay, I thought I could have got it here, and I didn't get it here, but I trusted you didn't give it to me because you didn't see me, as opposed to you just didn't want to pass me the basketball. And that's, when you look at them, it's kind of a reflection of Anthony Grant. Like, he's just so much about the team. He's not about himself at all. And you look at their team, and that's the way they play. Yeah. It is, again, I don't want to make it seem like it's easy to do that, because it's hard. You got to have a lot of repetition to do that. But I think the mindset that you have to arrive at is, I think when people play basketball, and again, I'll just say, if you're in a gym, it's 5-on-5 and choose sides and they play, the typical mindset is, if I have the basketball and Jordan is my teammate and we're in a pick and roll, so Jordan's setting a pick on my guy, on my defender, I'm trying to use that for me to get a shot. Mm-hmm. Is what the typical mind, like, I'm going to use that until I can't shoot. Like, the pick and roll is only if I can't shoot, and then I want to get the assist. So I'm only going to pass to Jordan, and it's hard to get people out of that mindset that in the college game, where there's no illegal defense, it's going to be really hard for me to just get in a side pick and roll with Jordan and come off that pick, and I'm going to look to score, and if that's not there, I'm going to just pass to Jordan. The other three guys, you guys just wait till I'm done. Maybe next possession for you. That's hard, because the other teams, they can typically defend that. And that's why sometimes when you'll say, you guys, you didn't always dribble off of that. Well, yeah, because in practice, if that happens on the first side and we get a layup, the defense is probably going to get yelled at. Mm-hmm. We've got to at least make them go from the white line to get out to their guy and then get back to the white line so that we can find out what's going on here. And that means that, yes, that big now is going to get lifted because he knows he's going to probably get the basketball. But if every time I come off of your pick and roll, your pick, that I'm either shooting or passing to you, he's going to say, I'm better serve staying right here under the rim, for when you miss, I can get a rebound. Have
you had teams or players who are the opposite, who have struggled with they just are running the continuity and trying to get them to make a play more, or like on the other end of the spectrum?
Yes. And I think that typically in the beginning, they're a little mechanical. So it's difficult to get them. I mean, you're telling about spacing and options and what to look for and what not to do. And all I'm trying to do is not mess up after a while. I just hope I remember what I'm doing. And like, I'll give you an example. I'm giving you some trade secrets here, Jordan. I usually don't. I think you're going to talk to people who are going to say, "He told you what?" Like I usually. But you work with some good people, so you got me to open up a little bit. You're gonna be like the Barbara Walters of our business. Like that, to get someone to set, without going into specifics, but to get someone to set 2 screens before they look for the basketball is not what usually, I think, getting them to set 1 screen and look for a good one is, it's going to take a while, right?
Mm-hmm.
Unless it's just an offense where that's what you are. You're the screener all the time,
yep.
Right? But to get someone who's a pretty good player to set a screen and then set another screen, you got to kind of expect that he's going to forget to do that a couple times. And it might not be because he doesn't want to do it. It might be, but it might not be. It's just going to take him a while. And after forgetting and then getting told that you need to set that screen, you need to set that screen, you need to set that screen, he might become a little mechanical until it becomes something that's instinctive, until the 10,000th time when, he understands and he sets them. He understands that if he sets 2 good ones, he's more likely to be open. And I use that as an example of, initially, you gotta, and then once guys get into, it becomes ingrained, then they begin to realize, I don't have to go through all of this if I can drive the ball to the basket. If I have a shot here, this is a good shot. It's a good shot. And we begin to realize, as Coach Grant said, you got to have a license to shoot certain shots. So what's a good shot for Jordan might not be a good shot for me.
When BYU and Stanford, the two other teams that run a lot of this, mostly as their primary offense this past season, the backdoor or cutting across to another side, I think that something that they do, and watching your team, it doesn't necessarily seem like this is something that you do a lot, but I'm wondering if every once in a while they'll call out a play basically out of it. Like they want the ball to get reversed 3 times and then they're looking for a very specific option. Maybe it's the backdoor that we were talking about that you guys get a lot, or a post. They might be looking to roll and then throw the ball right into the post. Do you script it all? I know you've talked so much about reading the defense, which kind of goes against the scripting, but does that ever happen for you guys?
Oh, absolutely. Yeah. So we'll have some options that we'll say, okay, we're going to look to get the ball to a certain player at a certain spot. Or we may switch and just run this option just to get this look from this player. So yeah, we would definitely do that. And it helps because what I've found out is that, in an offense like this, when you're running it this way, a small little tweak will go a long way. And it might be something that no one else notices. Because as you mentioned, you might get 2 or 3 ball reversals and it looks the same. And then all of a sudden, something very small that you can tweak goes completely unnoticed. And it might be an adjustment. It might be a call. It might be just a read that a player does. That helps too, because sometimes they could be in a huddle at the free throw line and say, "Hey, listen, this was going on." Now, I think that happens. Sometimes they'll make a call because they've seen it in practice. They've run it enough in practice where this is being guarded in this fashion, and it might be a huddle where they say, "Okay, let's look for this." And all 5 guys know, okay, this is what we're looking for. But again, I think it's those little things that you can have done so many times that now all of a sudden you're making a call based on what you read. And then we'll have some different entries into it as well.
I've heard with there's like stories about the Carolina break, that they've run forever with Dean Smith and Roy Williams. Like they started running Spain action out of it, where they set a screen on the ball screener because Rasheed Wallace like did it by accident in a practice one day or something like that. And I feel like when you run the same thing and you're always trying to fine tune the system year over year, that it just like it might maybe sometimes it's not even like you set out to do it. It just evolves over time. Is that
absolutely like the Iverson screen, right?
Yeah, everybody's
calling it Iverson screen.
Yeah,
but it's something that this player did, and you might, as a coach, at first say, "Oh, what? Oh." Let's do that again, and it ends up not being a bad thing, like, I'll go ahead and tell us. So like, we had a player for us at Buffalo named Javon McCray.
Yep.
And he's freshman of the year. And he was 3-time first team all conference, and he ended up his senior year being the player of the year, and he's an all-time leading scorer in the history of the school. So his freshman year, obviously, this is new to him. He's doing a lot of movement, a lot of moving, which I think that's the thing that you're asking bigs to maybe move a little bit more than they have. It does require a great deal. You can't just get somewhere and hold on and then just post up, put your hand up. And sometimes, not saying that he was that way, but sometimes in high school, that's what maybe we ask. And I was a high school coach. I mean, sometimes you're a big guy. You want him as close to the basket as you can. Well, Javon, at times, we would try to figure out, did he do that because he knew that would work? Or was he in the wrong spot? Because if you say you're in the wrong spot, but he scored on that 3 times in a row. So we had to put some things in and name them just because he might do them. And if he did them, I mean, he was scoring. I mean, so he scored over 500 points as a freshman off the bench, never played more than 23 minutes in a game. So, I have some of these with coaches, particularly former players, and especially those ones who they would say, "Wait, coach, he's in the wrong spot," and then the other ones would say, "He's not in the wrong spot. He knows what he's doing. You're in the wrong spot. You need to look at what he's doing." Because he would just, again, he might, instead of reversing the ball, he might go back to the same side. He might just do stuff. And what I found is then, as a coach, when he's that effective doing it, you need to be prepared to say, okay, if he does that, we can't tell him not to do something that's continuing to work. But if he does do that, we can't stop and say, you're in the wrong spot. If it's working. Now, if he's throwing the ball out of bounds or, it's helping the other team, then you got to say, wait a second, hold on here a second. But maybe that's something we can look at if it's working, and it was working. So we had to have, okay, well, this is what we're doing if he does that. You go here and you go here and you go here. And all of a sudden that looks like that's pretty good. And there were the things that came up over the 3 years that I coached him and we had some guys around him who were a little bit more experienced in what we were doing. And they were like, okay, well, if he does that, then all right, we got you. And they could recognize it, they could pick it up. And it became stuff that we did for a while. And we had a name for it. And it wasn't something that you could see coming because we couldn't see it coming. He just did it, So those are the type of things I think as there are people that run this as more of a play.
Yep.
And when you're doing that, you just kind of you got to go to those spots and run that play as opposed to an offense where you can run some little tweaks to it.
Mm-hmm. And even, Duke and Kentucky over the last 5-10 years, they've ran it as a play. It's by no means their main offense, but Duke they line up in four across the foul line, and then they just get right into it, and they don't usually get to a third side. And it's kind of a quick hitter for them. But Kentucky, the same thing. So my last question for you here is why do you think everyone is running it? And did you anticipate that 10 years, 20 years ago? Would you have thought that so many teams were running this offense?
No, absolutely not. The second question, absolutely did not. I mean, what has happened is that someone will run it, they'll be on TV, and someone will, record it and then text it to me. And, it might be a former player or a coach, or it could be a coach who is now a head coach, but was an assistant coach and had that scout, and they'll text it to me and say, you'll say something, because there are some coaches, and you probably have maybe talked to a few of them, that get a little irritated that the origin of it is not better known. So I did not imagine that, when we first started running it, and we don't get this as much, but I can remember when we first started running it, the question that we would get is, where'd you guys get that offense? We were younger coaches. There would be older coaches, retired coaches, and they'd say, and that was a hard question to answer, because I wasn't going to say we made it up, or, I wasn't going to say that. And I don't say that now. I go, where'd you get? I mean, we had to try to get good shots. Well, so-and-so says that, it's a European. I say, well, maybe it is. I didn't see, I don't know. They could have been doing this in 1922, because I had come to America then, but maybe they were. I hadn't seen them do it, I think people do it. The reason I think people do it, because we've had this happen now in a couple of different conferences. Here's what I think happens. When people prepare for an opponent, if their scout team is scoring or getting good looks at the basket, then they go, wait a second. We might need to take a look at this, at running this, because usually you don't have your best players on your scout team, right? And unless they're, sit outs, right? Maybe sitting out the year. Usually your best players are trying to stop the scout team. And I would think you have a reasonable expectation that they're going to prevent the scout team from getting good looks to the basket. So the stories that I've gotten, feedback that I've gotten is, hey, our scout team was, getting great looks, or they were scoring a lot on us. That's usually the first sign of, within a couple years, that coach is now running. So I've been in that situation a couple of times in a couple of different leagues, where I look up and I go, whoa, this closer look, and I go, oh, I know, yeah, I know what they're running. Only a few times I have to think hard about. Maybe there's been, usually I see them running it in the games leading up to our game, and then we get in the game and they don't run it
against you
usually.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Then they run it the next game. Mm-hmm. But I can't remember who it was. There was someone who did run it against us and scored. And I can tell you that's a hard thing to accept. That's really, really hard to not get upset by that.
It's also, I think it's trickled down to high school and AAU. I mean, this is not just, I call it like the 2020 version of flex. What flex was, 10, 20 years ago. I ran flex in high school. I feel like now teams are running continuity ball screen, and I think it's a good offense for lower levels as well, especially because you can get very into the reads, and like we've talked about, you can get very into the details in the reads, or you can kind of learn it on the fly and go from there. Have you seen, when you're recruiting and things like that, have you seen teams running it?
Yes, I've seen teams in high school teams, AAU teams, run it, and I wish I was set up to be able to keep up with the emails and things that people send. I hope that people will maybe listen to this or
There we
watch
go.
this and say, okay, I mean, really, I like talking basketball, and I got to find a way to be able to connect with the people who have some interest in it. Because in the beginning, like, no one was calling me about it. Even when other people ran it, they would call somebody else, and I guess enough time has gone by and say, okay, well, let's reach out to this guy. So I got to try to find a vehicle to be able to reach them. So that in that regard, I appreciate what you're doing. You mentioned the flex, and I said to you earlier that we ran that
with Beeline, right?
Yeah. And people still run it, and they still score. I mean, Al Skinner, he was running that flex against everybody, and they were scoring. He was phenomenal. So I think you have to be willing to work at it. And for going back to your original question, when I see high school teams, at least, high school teams or AU teams run it, at least I can kind of visualize if it's someone we're recruiting, can they have some success with it? And usually it's a base option. Most teams will run some of the base options of it. But at least it's not completely foreign to most. Like it's amazing. We first started doing it, you'd be recruiting a kid and he'd say, what kind of offense? Or his coach would say, what kind of offense? And we first started doing it. You mentioned flex, but in between those two was 4-out motion. Like if you weren't running 4-out motion, which I still think is great offense, then they were looking at you like, well, what do you run? And do you run a Princeton offense? And then as Coach Beeline started really becoming more, well, he was always very successful, but more known, then maybe you might say 2-guard. But if you said no to all of those, people thought, you should be drug tested. Like, well, are you just playing defense the whole game, or are you running anything? So now it's you okay. So that's what you're running, and you might be more apt to hear the response of, oh yeah, we ran something like that. We might have to get on them about certain little things to get them to be in, spacing. But I think even most of the guys have been exposed to it to some degree.
Yep.
Just not the details and not beyond the base options.
Dribble drive motion was another one that got really popular.
Yes. Yes, absolutely.
Yeah. So I guess before we go real quick, you mentioned some people that whether you've worked with them or whatever, advocating for your role in the offense. And I have to shout out Jesse Bopp, who has been a guest on this podcast. I worked with him at New Mexico State, and anytime that I was tweeting about the offense in the beginning, he was bringing you up. So I have to give Bopp a shout out for sure.
And Jesse Bopp is awesome, and it was great. Obviously we had a great season when we worked together for Matt McCall at UTC, and it was great fun working with him, and we had a great staff. It was great, great fun working with all those guys. I was kind of like the old guy on the staff, right? And then the players were a lot of fun to work with too. So that was a lot of fun. And I think in those situations, I've been a head coach at Division I level just 2 years at Alabama and at UTC.
Yeah.
And then aside from USA basketball, the one summer, that's the only years at the Division I level that I was an assistant coach. But I learned so much, and I have said this to people a lot, and that is that there's more than one right way to do things. So sometimes people will get in a situation where they've come up, and I don't like to use the word system. I like to use the word approach. Sort of like a batter when he gets in the batter's box. He has an approach to what he's looking for. And if he's looking fastball, curve, whatever it is, he might do something else, but that's his approach. And oftentimes I think guys get in one way, one approach, and it's really good, but you can't close your mind off to the fact that there are other good ways of doing it too. So as coaches, sometimes we have to give up, our need to be right and then just learn.
Well, I appreciate you sharing your approach a little bit. Hopefully didn't give too much away for the opposing coaches, but I really appreciate you taking the time and coming on. Yeah, thank you so much.
Oh, you're welcome, Jordan. My pleasure.
No hand checking. Michael Jordan, Scottie Pippen, Tony Kukoc.